Welcome to Daikaiju Fest 2021 for our panel of 20 years of Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. I am your co-host, Kenton. With me is your other co-host.
Jason, how's it going?
So, like what we've been doing, depending upon where you've come in during the course of this online virtual festival, um, what we are doing is most of the panels that we are doing, we're celebrating anniversary milestones of various kaiju tokusatsu films. And just like with any of the other films, we are not really going to go behind the production scenes or anything like that into the history of these films. Part of that is because a lot of these panels that we've been doing have been going about an hour on average, and we feel like at best that's kind of the best time to spend on something like this. Not to mention, too, when we have originally discussed these films, we've talked about some of those behind the scenes moments during those previous podcasts. And on top of that, too, there are just other podcasts, other resources out there that will go further in depth with that information than what we can here. What we specifically are wanting to do with these anniversary specials is to just talk about the films, talk about any sort of lasting legacy that they have left, talk about their impact on their respective franchises in the kaiju genre in general. So, Jason, you want to start us off with our 20 years of GMK?
Well, speaking of 20 years, it's sort of hard to believe that it's been that long since this movie was made. It just somehow it sort of seems like it was made yesterday in a way, but I think if I can remember, I think that this was I shouldn't say I think. This is one of the probably most hyped up Godzilla films back in the day,
Still is.
simply because of Shusuke Kaneko directed this film for simply because of his fame to uh, directing the whole Gamera Heisei trilogy, and I can remember sort of the hype uh, from his announcement of him directing this movie all the way up to the release. And if I can remember, I think that this is probably one of the Godzilla movies uh, that I don't know. I just didn't really seem all that interested simply because of the overhype. When there's a movie that gets really hyped up, uh, I just tend to not really follow it a whole great
You're a
deal.
contrarian.
Yeah, and I know I've mentioned about this before. It's probably the same thing with you. I'm not sure how you feel about it leading up to the release of the movie here, but and when it came to the release, I'm not sure when it was released here
I think it
in
was
the States.
2003. It premiered on the Sci-Fi Channel network with Mega Gira. So both films, that was the first time either one of those premiered here in the States. Sci-Fi got those special rights to do that. And I remember we watched that mini marathon of these two um, films because obviously people here in the States, unless you went over to Japan when these were released in the theaters, no one over here had seen them. So they were dubbed and ready to go for Sci Fi Channel. And I do believe it was 2003, like mid late summer
Yeah,
2003 when those premiered.
yeah. If that was the case, then I think the DVD followed not long after when it premiered on the Sci-Fi Channel there, and I can't quite remember what my reaction was after watching this movie. I think it's vague, but don't uh oh don't quote me on this, but I probably had some sort of mixed feelings after watching this movie, and I think simply because maybe the like some of the acting, like the main cast, I don't know, they I just didn't quite get attached to them a whole lot, and I think that was one of your gripes too about this movie was the casting of it. And as far as some of the visual effects, practical effects, and some of the monster battles, they were pretty good. Um, but as far as the design, mainly King Ghidorah in this one, it just didn't feel right for me. And as far as the whole mystical type of thing that Kaneko was going for this movie and everything, it just didn't really fit with the whole entire uh, lore or the Godzilla universe.
Yeah, for me, I was one of those people with every Godzilla, movie or miniseries or whatever that comes out. I'm initially excited about it because more Godzilla is good, in my opinion. And so this was one of those films, just like again, like I just said, any other film I was looking forward to. And even before the film was released, I ended up finding out, originally instead of Ghidorah and Mothra, there was supposed to be Anguirus and Varan. When I found out about that, I was pretty disappointed because those are two kaiju, Varan especially, that just really have not gotten as much screen time really since kind of the earlier Showa periods, and even then, Varan only had the single movie and then barely had any sort uh, of appearance in Destroy All Monsters
Yeah, he
a
was
number
kind of
of
a
years
one and
later after
done.
his first film, and um, and I was hyped for this film, though. I'm like, Shusuke Kaneko, yeah, I love that Gamera 90s trilogy. Um, I just was hyped. And so when this premiered on Sci Fi Channel, and again, I think it's 2003 with Megaguirus, I walked away from both films at that time disappointed. Um, and I think I was not only was I just disappointed overall, I may have been a bit more disappointed in GMK because again there was all that hype coming in. It was Kaneko and all that stuff, and I thought what we got was at best average, if not really subpar. And at the time, and for a number of years afterwards, both of those movies, Megaguirus and this film, GMK, were at or near the bottom of my favorites list. Like, I just did not care for these. And for me, it wasn't so much the casting that I had an issue with, it's the overall writing. It's the storytelling, the writing, and just in some ways, the portrayal of the characters, the action, the kaiju themselves that I have issues with this film. Um, I don't have a problem with the mysticism element in the film. In fact, I've always been one of those people. I've been seeing it online in various superhero Facebook groups and all that, where I'm like, things need to change every so often to keep these properties, these characters relevant, and to keep them going for years to come. And so you got to dabble in things every once in a while. Otherwise, things get stale, and you end up telling kind of the same stories after a while. And again, it's similar to Shin Godzilla. I give an A for effort for trying something different. But like Shin Godzilla, I thought the execution in GMK fell fairly flat. Um, Even to this day, and for longtime podcast listeners, you basically know where my stance on this. In fact, for me, I think before even Shin Godzilla was released, I think GMK was at the bottom of my favorites list. Um, and GMK is probably happy that Shin Godzilla did come out because now it's not last on my favorites list. But might as well just kind of get into it a little bit deeper. And sorry, folks, for those of you who love this film, this is probably going to be, a panel discussion here that's going to be fairly negative on the film. We'll try to end the panel, however long that may take, with some more positivity to end it on a better note. But this, by and large, is probably going to be negative. So, look, if you love the movie, that's fine. It's you like what you like. You have your own tastes, etc. Just understand that we like what we like, you like what you like, and you love the movie, that's fine. Um, but yeah, you talk about the effects. I think the computer effects are pretty darn good here. That's one positive, I guess I gotta say, about this film. But when it came to the practicals, I think it's a mixed bag. I thought some of the practicals looked exceptional, but then there were some practicals that I thought looked pretty poor. Um, One of my biggest gripes about the practical effects in this film is that I thought, by and large, all the suits in large chunks of the film did look like suits. Um,
Yeah, and one of the things too I wanted to point out is that when it came to the concepts of how Godzilla was supposed to look, he was supposed to look, pretty slim and kind of more dinosaur-like in a way. But then in the whole end of with the suit and everything, it just looked like just kind of like a laid back human, just like kind of tilting back more and just looked a bit too big in a way.
well, yeah, I think to me the Godzilla suit, the design itself, I think is decent, but it got chunky. When you got into the thigh area, and I'm not trying to fat shame this Godzilla or anything like that, but I just don't. I think the way that they went about design actually putting the suit together, it does look like a suit. It looks like foam rubber. You don't get that from many of the other suits. All the Heisei suits, for example, I think look 100 times better than what we get here in GMK. Um, the and part of it is the lighting choices in this film. I think the lighting choices helped exacerbate some of those issues I have with these suits because the Godzilla suit, like you can tell with the feet, the big, heavy feet, they definitely look like Frankenstein type uh, that thing. It just doesn't. And again, I understand these are fantasy films, but and it's not so much like I am complaining about a radioactive dinosaur in a fantasy film. It's that everything that has come before it looked a lot better than what was done here. And I know even Kaneko himself, and I want to get this out of the way because I'm not going to put all of the blame on Kaneko. I'm putting part of the blame on Toho. It was reported, I think even shortly, like a while or so after the film was released and all that, the Kaneko did come out at one point and complain that Toho just didn't give him the sort of time he wanted to put the film together. And he said, "Look, if I had more time, I would have been able to put together something that was better than what you saw." So, and we all know Toho's history with these types of films. It's just like you get a few odd months to film, and then by the end of the year, it's got to be in theaters. So,
Hmm.
you were
Yeah,
going to say something?
yeah, and then as far as the other suits, just kind of want to continue. As far as some of the designs on the other ones, uh, the other monsters in this one, they do look pretty good. But then, as far as the execution, mainly, I would say when it came to both Mothra and Ghidorah, they're pretty stiff. I would say just about as stiff as Batra in a way. And as far as King Ghidorah, he's more of a space monster. But then with his design, they kind of make it more like kind of the mystical dragon-esque type of look for him, and then also his size. It just didn't quite feel like the Ghidorah that we all know.
Yeah, I mean, with Ghidorah, that's another suit I have issues with. I think all the suits, I think the Godzilla and Ghidorah suits look, they come out, in my opinion, looking the worst out of all the suits.
I would
The
say,
Mothra one, I think the marionette was only shown in a few shots. Otherwise, at least adult Mothra was CG, and I think Mothra larva was all CG. And the only thing of Mothra that was any sort of practical was the marionette, and even then, I don't think that showed up in too many scenes. Otherwise, that too was mainly CG in the end. Um, but and I give an A for effort for trying something new and different. But what ended up happening with Ghidorah in terms of its size and all that, I was not impressed. I didn't like the facial
It just
structure.
didn't look too intimidating.
Well, yeah, and I understand though too. Part of it is that it's supposed to be an Earth Guardian, and I think on some
Right.
level they didn't want it to look too ferocious.
Right.
Um, but yeah, different designs could have taken place, and again, I think his team had maybe more time, maybe things indeed would have turned out differently, even with the Ghidorah design. We'll never know. But for what we did get, I'm not a fan of this Ghidorah at all. In fact, it's my least favorite out of the Ghidorah incarnations. I just am not a fan of this at all.
Yeah, and also just making him like an Earth Guardian, so basically on the good side, and this was basically the first for Ghidorah, it just didn't quite fit him fairly well. I mean, he's better off being as the villain as he's always have since the very beginning. But out of uh, but other than that, out of all the suits that we've seen in this entire film, I would say by far the best looking one would have to be Baragon in this one.
The Baragon, I like the Baragon and Mothra designs, and I like a little bit of the Godzilla design. I think in the Godzilla head, kind of from the torso on up, I like the plates and all that too on it. It just to me looked too chunky, and it made the suit and the performance of Godzilla throughout the movie definitely not look it looked off. But yeah, Baragon I really enjoyed in this film. I like the Mothra design as well too. I like the fact that they were more vibrant colors on her wings. I like that aspect, and the fact too that from her thorax region she shot out like these stingers as well. I liked that as well. Um, but yeah, and I think this is kind of where you and I differ a little bit. I think you're more with when it comes to this film. I think you're more hardcore in keeping things in terms of at least roles of characters in a more traditional sense. I'm okay with them experimenting more. Like, yeah, the whole idea of King Ghidorah being a good guy is intriguing because at that point in time we hadn't seen something like that. Again, like I said, A for effort, but I have to give an F for execution because the way it just turned out was not good in my opinion. I think part of the problem, writing issue in general, and the design of Ghidorah, the main problem is also Godzilla being too overpowered. I think in this film. Um, that is part of the problem. Yeah, sure, there were moments in which Mothra and Ghidorah in the end battle kind of were, doing a decent job of tag teaming Godzilla, but there was never any point during that moment where you thought they were going to bring him down. It just wasn't going to happen. And then it ended up, in order to finally defeat Godzilla, it took um, 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 the one of the main characters to drive a submarine into Godzilla and for Godzilla to try to shoot his fire, and instead it comes out of his neck. And then on top of that, King Ghidorah trying to do a Hadouken at one point as well. And in the end, the Guardian monsters utterly failed. And that's part of it. I understand, but then at the same time too, when it came down to it, the and this is kind of is getting into the writing portion of the film. The Guardian monsters did nothing to Godzilla because it's not like Godzilla in most movies where he's an animal and then gradually over the course of a fight he'll wear out. This is a Godzilla possessed by the souls of the dead from World War II. So he's just gonna go. And neither Ghidorah, neither Mothra, neither Baragon, and even the three Guardian monsters as a whole, they did nothing in the overall defeat of Godzilla. They sank him for what, a moment or two. But again, this is a Godzilla that is not an actual living organism. This is a Godzilla that is possessed. And so trying to drown him or whatever, that's not going to do it. And besides, even if he was a real animal Godzilla like we see in most of these movies, he survives in water. So none of it matters, none of it makes sense. And in the end, it takes kind of this really it takes for Godzilla to be kind of stupid on some level because he swallows the sub and yet somehow the muscles and all that stuff and the fact that the sub probably gets lodged in Godzilla's throat, that doesn't somehow make Godzilla want to regurgitate the sub or anything like that. Like somehow our character is able to drill a hole through the side of Godzilla's neck, and that's what ultimately defeats this Godzilla. I've always found that to be utterly disappointing and ridiculous. I understand it's a fantasy film, but my suspension of disbelief only goes so far. And I think, regardless of whatever your boundaries are with your own suspension of disbelief, that whole ending, the fact that the Guardian monsters truly didn't matter in the overall defeat of Godzilla, and the fact that he dies more or less from his own stupidity, really should disappoint you. It's not well written. It is one of the most disappointing endings in a kaiju film that I've ever seen. It just I was hoping for something more, and part of that was just because of the hype surrounding this film to begin with. But
Mhm.
the way this movie ends is ridiculous.
Yeah, and then even with Shusuke Kaneko, with him directing this, just watching it overall just didn't quite feel like a Shusuke Kaneko movie because I mean we've seen the whole Gamera trilogy and how he progressed that trilogy film by film, but then when it comes to this film, like a few years later, it just it, it just didn't quite look like something that was directed by him. It just kind of had that Toho esque type of feel, and it definitely shows
Well, again,
throughout the
part of
entire
that has to
film.
do with a much shorter shooting schedule than what he was used to with that Gamera trilogy.
Right.
And I don't know what this budget was compared to the Gamera films. In fact, my understanding was that like Gamera 95's budget was like I think almost half of the 95 Godzilla's budget, if I'm not mistaken. So, and because it was Dai, we know Dai as being a smaller studio. Um, Again, I put half the blame on Toho. The other half I do blame on Kaneko. I still believe Kaneko, being as talented as he is and his crew, I still think on some level the end product could have been improved. Um, Again, though, I will say, like, from the visual effects standpoint, this is arguably the better looking visual effects Godzilla film in the whole Millennium era. And but like I said, there are a bunch of other areas where this film really comes up short. This is a film that I think comes up short in every area imaginable when it comes to a film. Um, you know, you talk about, we've been talking about the effects for a while here, like getting into the story part. I like the idea of a Godzilla being possessed by the dead, but I still think overall, and again, I've been told by some people that I need to watch the movie with English subtitles because obviously, when it comes to Japanese English translations, a lot of things get lost. Um, and I just haven't had time to go through and watch this movie with English subtitles, not to mention we've been stuck with it for 20 years. And it's not one of my favorites. Part of me is just like, well, if I got free time, why would I watch something I don't really care for? But one of these days, I'm going to sit down and watch it with the subtitles because I hear that when you watch it that way, you get more details out of the story than what you do through the dub, and then that enhances the story more. But I still don't think this movie necessarily goes to the lengths of trying to get the message across that it wants to get across. Because in the end, it does turn out to be nothing more than a let's stop Godzilla at almost any cost. And there's just no messaging, no proper messaging here. They start off with like, we got to remember the war dead, but then in the end, it's like, let's just stop Godzilla, and it ends on that. There's nothing like, we need to do better about remembering those who sacrificed their lives for us.
And one of the other things that sort of turned me off by this movie, and I think you mentioned about this the last time we talked about this movie in the past, was that the main cast, or kind of
The characters.
the main character, it just felt like she they weren't quite that likable, or like they didn't try to draw you in all that much. Even the main character's dad's, like, he was sort of like an a-hole throughout the entire thing.
Um, you know, I don't think at least in my opinion, I don't think he came across like an a-hole, like you said. Um, my again, my issue the characterizations is definitely a big issue for me in this film, but overall, again, it comes down to overall writing. Um, Yuri Tachibana, our main character, and her dad, Admiral Tachibana. Um, Her dad, Admiral Tachibana, I think is the most likable character in this film. But again, we don't get a whole lot of him. I think if he were the main character of this film, I would like it at probably a little bit better because what we get with Yuri is a very whiny, petulant, uh, you know, woman baby is what we get. I've never seen such a really whiny character. She has no real arc in this story either. Towards the end, they try to redeem her a little bit, but they really don't because she's this cryptozoologist type of reporter, and she's always. It's hard to even describe because the movie doesn't really tell you exactly what she wants out of this period of her life. Like, is she wanting to move up into the real news world? Is she wanting to move up within her own company? Um, it's really unclear to figure out what her motive is. All she is this cryptozoologist, National Enquirer type of reporter that reports on fake stuff. And we don't know what she wants, and in the end nothing changes. Maybe her relationship with her dad gets a bit closer, but we don't even see that pan out because after they see each other for the first time, when he comes out of that mini sub after Godzilla blows himself up, the next shot we get is underwater with the beating Godzilla heart, and then it fades to credits. We don't see any sort of moving forward or sort of fast forwarding of what's going on between the admiral and his daughter. No arc for either of them. However, the admiral is more likable because he's a better actor, and I think though too, if the story were told more from his point of view, the movie itself I think would be even more entertaining. Instead, we get this very
Is
whiny girl who I don't know what she wants, and in the end, nothing changes. And so none of these characters are relatable, and there's no real arc. There's no arc in general for any of these characters.
But yeah, as you've said basically throughout this entire thing so far, it's mainly the writing.
The writing across the board is the problem.
It's like whoever came up with the characters. I'm not sure because there's three names attached to the writing part, including Shunsuke Kaneko. So I'm not sure if it's
All
entirely
three of them on some level deserve
him.
some blame.
Yeah. But I'm not sure who, in fact, kind of did her part. But yeah, basically all three of them have some sort of responsibility as far as the development of these characters in a way. And I think I shouldn't say think, they should have done a better job as far as the character development and their reasons is in this movie, because as you said, there's really no arc uh, basically to the main character in this one, Yuri, or her reason being in this. Um, yeah, it's just there should have been better development as far as these characters go.
And that's one of my issues, I think, with so many fans, at least in the West, loving this film so much. I would be totally fine if people admitted that this film was flawed, but yet they would consider it a guilty pleasure. There's like, I consider the 67 Yongari movie as a guilty pleasure, even though I freely admit that film is knuckenfuts. Um, but a lot of people hold this one up as one of the best in the series. And this film is seriously flawed. And, and I think it deserves way too much. It's been getting way too much praise, in my opinion. Again, if you love it, that's fine. But I really think when you sit down and you watch this thing and you see it play out, this is in my opinion, a generic giant monster flick, which is fine. But again, the reason why I have so much of an issue with it is because so many people hold this up as one of the best. And I'm like, no, it really isn't. If you're looking at a film, a Godzilla film that is, as an example of anywhere from good to great writing and good execution, if not great execution on the screen, to me, this would be a middle of the pack at best film.
And I think that's one of the other reasons why I'm a contrarian when it comes to this film, with so many people, talking about it, being like one of the best or the best Godzilla movie in the franchise, and that also sort of turns me off from this movie too. Is just that, you know, you say that it's one of the best and stuff, and two, like you said, that uh, it just feels like that they don't admit that there are some flaws within certain movies, uh, such as GMK here, and it just feels like that they're making this seem almost too perfect without any flaws or anything of the such, and that's kind of one of the things that turns me
Well, and
against
again,
this movie.
I want everybody to understand that we're not beating you up. We just kind of would appreciate it more if you kind of were to sit back a little bit and
Just kind of,
separate yourself for a bit from the film. Um, But I think one of the reasons, and I don't know if some of the fans know it or not, is I think some of the reasons why many of them hold it up in high regards is because Kaneko is connected to the film. He's the director, and so many people, myself
I would say
included,
that's one of the
love
things,
that
yeah.
Gamera trilogy, and they just are at this point because they're saying the Gamera trilogy was gold. That regardless, like they, I think, went in with this preconceived notion that this was going to be great, and that's just been something that they cannot detach themselves with. They cannot be an objective observer of the film. I very much was, and like I said at the top of this, I was very hyped to see this. I Part of it was I bought into the hype. Another part of it was that I was like, yeah, Kaneko's connected to this. I loved his Gamera trilogy. I really was hoping that he would bring that Gamera magic to Godzilla. And like I said, I walked away from this, and my opinions on Megaguirus have gradually changed over the years, but my opinions on GMK have not. Um, and I just it's been you know again, my issue is with the whole writing, and again, I'm not fully blaming Kaneko. I'm giving him 50% of the blame. Him and his crew 50% of the blame. The rest I'm blaming Toho on as well, the other half. And what we get here is a film with good ideas but poor execution.
Yeah, and I was kind of also hoping for some of that, kind of that magic touch that was put into the Gamera film and or trilogy, and I was kind of hoping that Toho would have given him some more of the free reign and sort of uh, learn from what he did with the Gamera trilogy. But of course, They
It's
just
Toho.
yeah, they were basically strict and had a timeline trying to fast track through things. It just would have been nice if they would have given him some free reign because with Kaneko, I think he's kind of one of the more prominent directors at that time,
I
especially
really
after the Gamera trilogy, for that
I
matter.
really do believe that if he went in saying, "Look, I need, let's say, either a full year, a year and a half, whatever he wanted, as far as time to put this thing together," and they said, "Okay," I do believe what we would have gotten would have come out a lot better. And my opinion on it, I do believe would be a lot different as well, because I do think we would have gotten something. I truly do believe the story would have been fleshed out and just overall better. I
And
do think characters would have been better. The kaiju would have been better.
and then and just basically in the end, the studio is just too powerful to dictate things and make its own
Toho
rules.
Toho is its own worst enemy a lot of the times, at least when it comes to kaiju films. Um, they are so overly protective of the Godzilla property, and all that. I mean, I think we talked about this before on the podcast, where
Umpteen times.
they hate it even when fans put together various clips of Godzilla movies as a tribute to the character. They go after these people. They, uh, will do a cease and desist. They threaten to sue people, as well. Toho is not very fan friendly. And I know other people have talked about this as well. I've seen numerous YouTube videos about it. I've heard other people on different podcasts talk about it as well. Toho is its own worst enemy a lot of the time when it comes to movies like this. In fact, you know what? I'm going to change the amount of blame I'm giving people. I'm giving 30% blame to Kaneko and his crew and 70% to Toho. I'm getting more angry at Toho the more we talk about this. Um, so yeah, like I still believe Kaneko and his crew still, because we saw it with the Game Room trilogy. I think they had the capacity to try to improve despite kind of climbing up a steep hill at points. But yeah, a lot of it's Toho's fault.
Hmm. Yeah, it's sort of a shame, but I think I would say fairly recently they're kind of letting some more of the free reign here and there, but sort of kind of keeping track, kind of what we've seen with the 2016 Shin Godzilla movie. But of course, I think that's
More bad
more
decisions.
more or less the director side instead of the studio. But yeah, I think they sort of learned their lessons over the years a little bit. I think more recently, but yeah, it's just yeah more more studio interference and as well as these tight deadlines that they've kind of been famous for over the
Well,
years.
yeah, and I think too, and many people who are fans of this film, and I completely agree with them. Um, if they had let, once again, Kaneko do his original idea of, instead of Mothra and Ghidorah, throw in Anguirus and Varan, yeah, I can understand from the studio side of it, you probably aren't going to sell as many tickets and make as much money. I get the business side of it, but I think from a fan side, you're going to love it so much more.
But I would say that if you have Godzilla attached, I think that would be enough as is instead of just
Not
using
always, though, no.
Mothra or King Ghidorah.
Well, Mothra and Ghidorah have been proven to be money makers for them. But yeah, I'm with a lot of fans. Like, I love those characters, but I'm fatigued of seeing those characters. I'm tired of seeing them, and I would like to see more. But until Toho themselves is willing to take an even bigger risk and do something like what Kaneko originally wanted to do, that probably would be a one and done thing. Like,
Or
they probably won't do it again for another 30, 40 years.
or
And
at least just still keep Anguirus and Varan in there, but then just maybe add, additional ones like they did with Mothra and Ghidorah. Maybe just had a little bit more time into the whole end product.
See,
That
you're
feels right.
talking in a way that makes sense that Toho, though, doesn't understand or care. That's kind of the problem. But yeah, I mean, and I kind of want to talk about the legacy of this movie, and we kind of, sprinkled that in a little bit here in our discussion. Um, that obviously this movie, at least here in the West, is still very popular. Still, a lot of people's favorite out of the Millennium era, and in fact, a lot of people's favorite overall within the saga. It was the highest grossing of the Millennium films during the time that these films were being released in Japan. I think
The
part of that, though,
$2.7 billion box office.
same time though, I think part of that was the Hamtaro cartoon attached at the beginning
It seems like
of
they
this
always have,
too.
yeah, they always had the Hamtaro stuff attached to Godzilla stuff.
Yeah, and so that kind of influences ticket sales a little bit, so they're kind of not necessarily accurate per se. Um, the thing is that, I at least here in the West, and I don't know how this thing is viewed up to this point 20 years later in Japan. But it seems like to me here, from what I've seen, this is a film that, I think as long as our generation is still around for another odd number of decades, this film is always going to be kind of near the front and center in terms of one of the more highly beloved Godzilla films. Um, Talking about here during this Daikaiju Fest, Godzilla versus Hedorah, and how the Boomer generation, some Gen Xers, held up Hedorah in very high regard. But yet you and I look at, we're like, it's decent, but it's kind of meh. Um, and we've said, kind of once the Boomer generation moves on, is that film actually going to be discussed the way that it has been for the last, 50, 60, well, not 60, but, like 50 years. And so, um, it's just kind of one of those things where I think every generation kind of has its grouping of Godzilla films that they, and it's going to be interesting because the Boomer generation is going to be really the first generation whose favorite Godzilla films we're going to see in the next couple of decades. We're going to find out whether or not some of those films, like Hedorah, continue to endure once most of that generation has passed on, and that's going to be somewhat, I think, telling as far as what's going to happen when our generation moves and passes on as well. That some of these films that our generation has really held on and said that these are some of the good or the best ones, will those continue to endure after we're gone? So it's going to be interesting, I think, as time passes.
Hmm. Yeah. So, with that, do you have anything else to add on this, or should we?
I just want to add a quick note. We didn't talk about the score. Ko
Oh
Tani,
yeah.
I like the guy as a composer. I really love his Gamera trilogy scores. His score here, though, I think is a step or two down from the Gamera score. Again, I think part of that was the tight production schedule given to this whole film. I think that's part of it. Second of all, it does at points remind me too much of Gamera, and um, I just am not as big of a fan of this particular score. There's one score that I really do like, and we hear it towards the end of the film. And I listened to this almost constantly when I first got the soundtrack to this number of years ago. It's a track called "Determined to Protect the Future," and that's my favorite. I think it does still sound very much like it came out of a Gamera film, unfortunately. But it is such a great piece of music that it's been one of my favorite pieces to come out of the Millennium series. Um, he did, I think, the best he could with what he was given in terms of time here. But sadly, I'm not a huge fan of the score. It sounds too much like it came from a 90s Gamera movie, too much. Um, it just I'm just kind of underwhelmed by it. And another quick mention, because I'm such a 98 Godzilla fan, stop with the stupid pandering of the whole uh, '98 Godzilla deal like we saw at the beginning of this film, where, well, I thought Godzilla attacked New York. Well, that's what the American experts say, but our experts here have doubt. Like, just cut it out. And of course, we know a few years later they'll end up putting the '98 Godzilla in against the Japanese one. And again, we're talking about a movie that's 20 years old and all that, but still, I just cut the crap, Toho. Like,
Well, I
that's all
can't.
I gotta say.
Yeah, I really can't say much as far as the soundtrack because it's been years and years since I've last heard of it, so I really sort of forgot how it sounded. So um, I might have
Again,
to.
most of it sounds like it came out of a '90s Gamera film.
Yeah, I one of these times if I can get around to it, uh, probably have to take a listen to it. So with that, any final
With
thoughts?
that, I understand it was, I wanted to go out on more positive notes. What I did was a more negative note. The positives is that, again, I think the concept was good. Um, and I'm trying to stay away from the negative, but
I would say the
I
concept.
like
Yeah,
Argon came back. I
I
guess
would.
it's a little bit harder to
I would.
talk more positive about
Yeah.
this film than I thought. Um, Kaneko finally got to direct his first Godzilla movie after going at him for almost 20 years. I'm sorry, folks. I thought this would be easier.
Yeah, I would say that yes, the concept, as far as the designs that they've shown us, I think before the principal photography, it sounded and at least looked pretty good on paper.
Literally. Yeah. Again, like I said, this is
And
harder than
then
I thought.
the visual effects are pretty good, and as well as some of the practicals in this.
Yeah. So damn, I'm sorry to disappoint. um, Again, though, if you love the movie, hey, that's great. But
And
hopefully, just hearing a different viewpoint, hopefully, it kind of gets you to understand and realize not only where we're coming from, but other people who are kind of like us, where we look at this particular film and are kind of like, we're not exactly sure why you guys are so in love with this. But I don't hate the movie. I'm just really disappointed by it,
and
and
then
it's definitely not one of my favorites.
what's your rating on this out of 10?
Out of 10, I have to give it a 2. Um,
Wow.
it's one of my least watched Godzilla films. You know, um, I mean, I probably on average watch this film once every 3 or 4 years. It's just not in my general rotation at all. I will watch Godzilla's Revenge a handful of times before I even get to this, and that's a film that's not even for me anymore. I'm a almost 37-year-old man, and that's a film that's kind of made for, more specifically. This just isn't in my general rotation. I'm not kidding. I get bored very quickly with this film. I've watched this film so many times that, unlike Megaguirus, where over time it started to grow on me. This film never has, and it's sort of like Shin Godzilla, where again I thought, even coming out of the theater with that, thought this is overly disappointing, but maybe with multiple viewings, I'll enjoy it more. And same thing with that movie, I have not. And as a result, I get just more disappointed with each viewing that I have because I'm like, not only could this thing have been better if you had put in Varan and Anguirus, it would have been so much better if he was given more time and other choices in terms of execution and writing were made. We've owned this film. The DVD of this came out in 2004, so we've had it for about 17 years now, and I've watched it enough to where, like I just said, I realize my opinion of this is not going to get any better. If anything, the best case scenario is that it stays the same. Worst case scenario is that it continues to fall. But with Shin Godzilla around, I don't think that's possible. But um, it just is disappointing because not only do I know the what could have been, but even then it's like, okay, well, still, yeah, you put in Mothra and King Ghidorah, it still could have been really great. And in the end, it still was a huge letdown. And as a result, it makes me think more about what could have been with Varan and Anguirus attached to it. And even if that, like, even if the human characters were no better in that version, um, enjoyed the film a little bit more because I would have been like, hey, there's Anguirus and Varan, and would have been probably a more interesting final confrontation as well, perhaps. But again, we'll never know. But yeah, I just continue to get more and more disappointed each time I watch him.
I'm gonna at least give it a 4 out of 10. Mainly just the effort that they try to put into this, but of course, the writing, and then as well as Toho, you know, as always, interfering with things, the tight deadlines and stuff. I would at least give them the effort for as far as what they were trying to do, but they could have at least made the writing of the story better than what they've led on, and as well as give the main characters in this story some more development and a reason to be there.
Relatable.
That too, and yeah, it would have also been nice if they could have at least kept Anguirus and Varan in there, but as always, they want to make this a more of a moneymaker, even though in the box office wise it did. But yeah, it just everything that I've mentioned here, just and as well as the execution, just kind of uh, made the end product, a mixed bag or a disappointment in a way. But I'm giving this film at least a 4 as far as the effort and the concept or idea that that Kaneko tried to get across.
Yeah. And with that, we're sorry this was such a downer. There are a couple of those this year, but again, if you love the movie, more power to you. You're more than welcome to disagree with us. But thank you so much for watching this panel on 20 years of Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Again, we wish it could have been more positive, but again, milestone anniversary. Felt like we had to discuss it, but thank you so much for watching. We hope you continue to enjoy the rest of Daikaiju Fest 2021.
And we'll see you in the next panel. Take care.